Now we can go down to jumbled sentences. Now over here you have jumbled sentences, but you have to identify the odd one out. So identify the odd one and key in the number. Does that mean I actually organize the paragraph? I mean, if the odd one, I'll read the sentences. If the odd one is easy to identify, that means the context is very clearly different, then I don't need to worry about organizing the paragraph. But if it is slightly more difficult than that, that means it's not so easy to spot, then perhaps organizing it could actually help me. Okay, now let's see. In English, there is no systematic rule for the naming of numbers. After 10, we have 11 and 12, then the teens, 13, 14, 15 and so on. That means there doesn't be systematic. Between 11 and 12, the names seem to change into teen. Okay. Even more confusingly, some English words invert the numbers they refer to. The word 14 puts the 4 first, even though it appears last, right? So again, you're saying that the teens put the word first. So again, it's not just that there's no systematic rule, there is also no systematic method. Okay. It can take children a while to learn all these words and understand that 14 is different from 40. Now, this is not about the language itself. This is actually about the difficulty with the language. So, while 1 and 2 talk to me about the strange aspects of the language, 3 tells me because the strange aspects, people find it difficult. So, let's keep it there, but it's not exactly in the same context as 1 and 2. What about 4? For multiples of 10, English speakers switch to a different pattern, 20, 30, 40 and so on. Again, strange aspects of the language. If you didn't know the word for 11, you would be unable to guess it. You might come up with something like 1 teen. Again, strange aspects of the language, which means very clearly 1, 2, 4 and 5 talk to me about strange aspects of the language in the way it deals with numbers. 3 tells me because of these strange aspects, kids can actually find it difficult to handle it. So, if I did even consider 3 is a different discussion. Having gone through a discussion of the fact, no matter how we arrange them, having gone through a discussion of the fact that there are strange things that happen about the way numbers are actually given names, then we would go down to saying, so it can take children a while to understand them. So, as it is, this is not part of this discussion. It's a subsequent discussion. So, 3 is the odd one out. In this case, I don't even need to order it. If it had become a little more difficult, I'd probably want to run an order to ensure that I'm able to handle it. But as it is, it's very clear that 1, 2, 4 and 5 talk about aspects of the way English names numbers, and 3 talks about the consequence of such naming. So, 3 is the odd one out over here. So, that was fairly straightforward. Now, the next question is about putting them together into a paragraph and identifying the odd statement again. Now, again, do I need to actually order them? It depends. If it's difficult, I'd probably want to order them, but if it is easy enough, I would pick the odd one out straight away. So, let's look at what we have. Having an appreciation for the working of another person's mind is considered a prerequisite of natural language acquisition, strategic social interaction, reflexive thought and moral judgment. That means being able to understand other people, right? Being able to understand other people is really necessary if you really want to interact effectively in any aspect. It is a theory of mind, though some scholars prefer to call it mentalizing or mind reading, which is important for the development of one's cognitive abilities. Now, it is a theory of mind, though some scholars prefer to call it mentalizing or mind reading, which is important for development of one's cognitive abilities. Now, cognitive abilities is not the same thing as social abilities. This is social abilities. This is cognitive abilities. So, I know this is social, but this is cognitive. Cognitive as in the facility whereby your mind works. So, they are not the same context. So, are the rest of my sentences going to relate to social or cognitive? Let's see. Now, though we must speculate about its evolutionary origin, we do have indication that the capacity evolved sometime in the last few million years. So, if they do talk about the capacity, then this would become relevant. So, at the moment, I don't know whether it's related to 2 or to 1, but if there's a capacity, then it has to be relevant to that capacity. So, let's just put a mark there. I'm waiting for some connection to 3. 4 says, this capacity, which capacity? This capacity develops from early beginnings in the first year of life to the adult's fast and often effortless understanding of others' thoughts, feelings and intentions. Now, that means the capacity, this capacity. So, we know 3 and 4 are related. We know 3 and 4. So, let's mark them then. 3 and 4 are related. So we can't, so 3 and 4 are related. So we can't leave either of them out. Now, one of the most fascinating human capacities is the ability to perceive and interpret other people's behavior in terms of their mental states, right? So there's a capacity as well. So 5 talks about a capacity, 4 talks about that capacity, 3 also talks about that capacity, isn't it? That means 3 talks about when the capacity involved. So 4 would introduce a capacity, right? Then 3 would talk about it does have evolutionary origin, but the capacity evolved sometime in the last few years. 4 tells us how the capacity works or how it develops in a person, and then there has to be something that tells us how this capacity helps us. Now, how does this capacity help us in our development of cognitive abilities? Because we are talking about what? The capacity to understand other people's thoughts, feelings and intentions. If you're talking about the capacity to understand other people's thoughts, feelings, intentions, then we are clearly talking about social capacities. We're not talking about cognitive capacities. So we know that we would actually have 3, 4 and 5 working with 1, but not with 2, because the capacity is to be able to arrive at social understanding, which is what we need for social activity, not necessarily for cognitive activity. So 2 is the odd one out here. So this one does not work. That's not part of the passage that we're looking at. So the option here would actually be, the odd one out here would actually be 2. Okay, so 2 would be your choice in that case. So that leaves us with a few more questions that we need to look at, one of which is a sequencing question. That means you have a paragraph that you need to put in order. Let's see how it works. Essentially, you know that you read all the statements from 1 to 4, get to understand not only what the context is, but some connection that you can make, figure out what you think the purpose is and make your sequence based on that. So let's see. Algorithms hosted on the internet are accessed by many. So biases in AI models have resulted in much larger impact adversely affecting far larger groups of people. I don't know where it goes just yet. Because I don't have a certain context to it. So I'll just put the number 1 there. Okay. Though algorithmic bias is the popular term, the foundation of such bias is not in algorithms, but in the data. Algorithms are not biased. Data is, as algorithms merely reflect persistent patterns that are present in the trained data. Now, basically, when you say so many biases have resulted in much larger impact, so, and then the person explains the biases. He says, you may call them biases, but they're not actually biases in the algorithm. They're biases in the people who actually present those algorithms. It's in the data that goes into the algorithm. It's the way the algorithm is put together with data. That is the bias. So that means 2 is related to 1. It actually explains the term biases there. Okay. 3. Despite their widespread impact, and 1 tells me that there is going to be widespread impact, and 2 tells me they are not exactly biases in the algorithm, they are biases in the data. But then 3 tells me despite their widespread impact, it's relatively easier to fix these biases than human generated biases. Because if you identify the data that's wrong, you can actually correct it. As it is simpler to identify the former, that means it's simpler to identify the data bias than to try to make people unlearn behaviors learned over generations. So we know that 3 has to come after 2 then. Let's look at it in that sequence. So algorithms hosted on the internet are accessed by many. So biases in AI models have resulted in much larger impact. And though we call them algorithmic biases, the term is not so much in the algorithm, it's actually in the data. So despite their widespread impact then, it's easier to handle them because if you handle the data, you can actually correct them. Whereas for human biases, you really have to get people to unlearn their attitudes, their behaviors, all that. So we know that 1, 2 and 3 actually work. What about 4? The impact of biased decisions made by humans is localized and geographically confined. But with the advent of AI, the impact of such decisions is spread over a much wider scale. Now, much wider scale is much larger impact. So the much wider scale, because it is AI, it is the fact that they are accessed by so many. The much larger scale leads to being accessed by so many, which means 4 actually has to come before 1. Okay, now let's read that in sequence. So the impact of biased decisions made by humans is localized and geographically confined because we have to depend on interaction with each other. But with the advent of AI, the impact of such decisions spread over on a much larger scale. Algorithms hosted on the internet are accessed by many. So biases in AI models have resulted in a much larger impact. Though you call them algorithmic biases, they are actually biases because of the errors in the data. So, you can correct them, whereas correcting human bias is difficult because you have to get people to change their ways of thinking. So, 4, 1, 2, 3 actually makes sense. So, your answer here would be 4, 1, 2, 3. Alright. So, that is your answer for this question. The next one then. So, what do we have here? Again, we have got to put 4 sentences into order. What precisely are the unusual elements that make a particular case so attractive to a certain kind of audience? So, it means the idea of unusual elements should have actually come in first. Okay. So, I will put one there. I do not know what comes before it or after it just yet. It might be a particularly savage or unfathomable level of depravity. Very often it has something to do with the precise amount of mystery involved. So, what are the unusual elements that make a particular case so attractive? Well, it could be a particularly savage or unfathomable level of depravity. It could be, right? Very often it has something to do with the precise amount of material. So, when you say it might be, it actually is an answer to a question. So, you are asking a question, you are offering an answer. So, 2 is definitely going to come after some question. Is there any question other than 1? Let us just see. But if there is no question other than 1, then it could actually be 2. 2 would actually come after 1. But unsolved and perhaps unsolvable cases offer something that ordinary murder does not. Now, if it is unsolved or perhaps unsolvable, it is why? Because there is a precise amount of mystery involved. If mystery is involved, then cases remain unsolved, and that is something that ordinary murder does not. That means something that is solvable is not as attractive as something that is not solvable. So, what is that then? So, I would actually have 3 after 2. Now, 4 says, why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others locked into permanent obscurity? Now, can 4, it is a basic question. It says, why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others locked into permanent obscurity? So, I know 4 is also a question. So, now if 4 is a question, then 2 and 3 are answers. 2 and 3 are answers to a question. Now, are 2 and 3 answers to 1 or 2 and 3 answers to 4? Or are 4 and 1 the same question? Now, let us just look at that. Why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others locked into permanent obscurity? What precisely are the unusual elements? In what? In a particular case. What kind of case? A criminal case. So, it means 4 and 1 are the same question. 4 and 1 are the same question in 2 parts, because you are introducing the idea of crime, talking about what aspects of a crime are actually so attractive, why do people get interested in them. Then you say there are certain levels of, let us say, behavior that are that makes something mysterious, and therefore, the mysterious ones are much more attractive than the ones that are solved. So, 4, 1, 2, 3 makes absolute sense. Let us look at that then. Why are some crimes destined for perpetual re-examination and others locked into permanent obscurity? What precisely are the unusual elements that make a particular case so attractive, right, to a certain kind of audience? Okay, the answer is it might be a particularly savage or unfathomable level, and the amount of, and very often the amount of mystery involved, because if there is mystery and it is not solved, they offer something that the ordinary murder that is solved does not offer. So, 4, 1, 2, 3 is a sequence that actually works. Okay, always read through the sequence, make sense of it, and then put your answer down. So, 4, 1, 2, 3 is going to be your sequence. Now, let us look at this question. This is about capturing the essence of the passage. In other words, what would be the best, the statement that encompasses what the passage is trying to talk about. That means the basic idea in the passage is delivered in which choice. So, manipulating information was a feature of history long before modern journalism established rules of integrity. That means even in ancient history, people manipulated information. A record dates back to ancient Rome, when Antony met Cleopatra and his political enemy Octavian launched a smear campaign against him with short slogans written upon coins. That means he minted coins with slogans against Antony. In other words, trying to manipulate, let us say, impressions formed in people's minds. The perpetrator, namely Octavian, became the first Roman emperor, and fake news had allowed Octavian to hack the republican system once and for all. The fake news being the slogans that he put onto the coins. But the 21st century has seen the weaponization of information on an unprecedented scale. Powerful new technology makes the fabrication of content simple, and social networks amplify falsehoods peddled by states, populist politicians and dishonest corporate entities. So everybody now has jumped onto that bandwagon, including governments, including populations, including dishonest corporations. They all actually manipulate the public through fake information given. The platforms have become fertile ground for computational propaganda, trolling and troll armies. That means the fact that all of us are socially connected makes it even easier for people to use such propaganda or to manipulate or to provide fake statements or to criticize for fake reasons other people. Okay. So, we know what this whole thing is saying. That means while this is actually a very old kind of human behavior, it is being engaged in a much larger framework now when there is so much new technology that's available to people in terms of interconnection. Okay. So, people need to become critical of what they read. Since historically weaponization of information has led to corruption, is he telling us that we need to be careful about this? The idea of we need to be careful is not actually here. It could be an inference, but it's not the essence of the passage. He's telling us it's reached terrific levels. So, 2, disinformation, which is mediated by technology today, is not new and has existed since ancient times. Fair enough. But the fact is, we'll hold that. Disinformation, which is mediated by technology today, that means which is actually, it's actually made possible by, or it's actually regulated by. Mediated would actually mean regulated. Are we saying it's regulated by technology or made possible by technology? Because mediated would mean regulated. We're not saying it's regulated, we are saying it's made possible by. So, I'll keep 2 there in case I don't have a better answer, but mediated is not actually the word that we want made possible by. Use of misinformation for attaining power, a practice that is as old as the Octavian era, is currently fueled, made possible by technology. So, 3 is actually better than 2. Octavian used fake news to manipulate people and attain power and influence, just as people do today. But technology and what role it has to play in it, that's not mentioned. So, the essence here is 3, because we are saying that it is a very old practice. What? The use of misinformation. To do what? To actually get or stay in power. But now it's something that's still happening because technology is making it even more possible. So, 3 then is the answer to this question. And that brings us down to the last one, which is again essence of a passage. Colonialism is not a modern phenomenon. World history is full of examples of one society gradually expanding by incorporating adjacent territory and settling its people on newly conquered territory. So, colonialism and settlers. In the 16th century, colonialism changed decisively because of technological developments in navigation that began to connect more remote parts of the world. So, thanks to sailing and thanks to better sailing vessels, people were able to colonize. The modern European colonial project emerged when it became possible to move large number of people across the ocean and to maintain political control in spite of geographical dispersion. That means you actually could get people to travel across the sea, your sailing technology became such that you could send people and you could also maintain contact with them. The term colonialism is used to describe the process of European settlement, violent dispossession and political domination of the rest of the world, including the Americas, Australia and parts of Africa and Asia. So, the person tells you that it's not modern, it started centuries ago thanks to the fact that people were able to sail and keep connection with the rest of the world, but it was typically a European kind of process which affected the Americas, North and South, Australia and other parts of Africa and Asia. Okay. So, as a result of developments in navigation technology, European colonialism led to the displacement of indigenous populations. It involves dispossession. But not displacement. Dispossession is you take things away from them. Displacement is you send them out, you send them to different places. So, we are not saying indigenous populations were displaced, we are saying indigenous populations were dispossessed and they were dominated over. So, this word is a distortion. So, we don't need one, right? Displacement is not dispossession. Displacement is you move people out from where they are to somewhere else. Dispossession is you take away their possessions. You make them subjugate them, you dominate over them, you actually take away their resources. That's dispossession. So, it's not the same thing. If I don't have another choice, I'll come back to it, but as it is, I have a distortion here. What about 2? Technological advancements in navigation in the 16th century transformed colonialism. enabling Europeans to establish settlements and exert political dominance over distant regions. Fair enough. This is more or less what the person is talking about. 3. Colonialism surged in the 16th century? No, that's when it began. Due to advancements in navigation, enabling British settlements abroad and global dominance? Only British? Only British or entire all of European? So it's not just the British part, right? So for two reasons here, the British and the surge. So are we saying it's surge? Let's say it's not a modern phenomenon. World history is full of examples. Okay, in the 16th century it changed decisively. Okay, so we could possibly run with the word surge. We may stay with that, but we are not thinking only about British settlements. We are thinking about European settlements. So there's distortion in 3. 4. Colonialism conceptualized in the 16th century? No, it says it's ancient history, isn't it? It actually says world history is full of examples. So we are not saying it's conceptualized. We are saying in the 16th century it changed decisively. So not conceptualized. So this is a distortion. So we don't need that. So for conceptualized here, we are not looking at 4. For British here, we are not looking at 3. For displacement here, we are not looking at 1. And so the answer, which is clear, is 2. Technological advancements transform colonialism, enabling Europeans to establish colonies. So 2 then is the essence of this piece. So we've come to the end of this discussion. Hopefully it was useful. You kept track of not just the content, but also the approaches and what you should be looking at to be able to answer questions. And that should possibly give you an idea of what you'll need to add to yourself in terms of preparation to be able to tackle stuff like this. Not just language, but also thinking processes. Okay, so all the best then, and thank you.